Welcome back to another episode of the Keep Going podcast with Vin Kennedy. I'm your host, Vin Kennedy. Today we have a special guest, Joe. You want to do a brief intro?
Yeah, I will. First and foremost, thank you so much for having me on. I'm so excited to talk today. My name is Joe Rinaldi. I'm a 28-year-old living here in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania with my wife, Michaela. First and foremost, I'm a child of God. I'm a husband, I'm a son, I'm a brother, I'm a friend. And then after all those things, I am a physical therapist by trade, but I am currently acting as a performance coach, running my own business, Project Endure. I'm a writer, I'm a speaker, I'm a podcaster. I do a whole lot of stuff, but before all of those things, I'm just a human being.
Awesome, man. Of course, and I appreciate your time. And obviously, you do a lot, and it's inspiring and it's cool. And one of the first things that I saw was the video of where you said you were losing your sight but gaining your vision. So I think that's a perfect place to start. It kind of tells your story, and we can kind of take off right from there.
Sure. So when I was 10 years old, I woke up one morning out of nowhere and couldn't see out of my right eye. It was quite a surprise, but we went into New York City. My parents took me to a bunch of different specialists. We tried to scramble and figure out what was going on. And by the end of a very long day, I was diagnosed with a genetic condition called Best disease. And for those of you listening, which is probably everybody who doesn't know what Best disease is, it's a genetic condition that causes progressive loss of central eyesight. So essentially, from 10 years old to 28, 18 years, I've had this progressive and sporadic loss of my central eyesight. And so it ebbs and flows. I have seasons that are relatively stable, and then periods of time where I'm losing pretty decent chunks of sight, and it's very unpredictable. And so for most of my life, I saw that as a really bad thing. I felt sorry for myself. I was angry, frustrated, lost, confused, you name it. And really, it's been in the last 5 or 6 years where my perspective has completely shifted and flipped. And I feel like as I've been able to see less and less of the world around me, I've had this perspective that's developed that's given me vision. I've been able to see things through a different lens. I've been able to see the world with gratitude everywhere I look. And my perspective is probably my favorite thing about this condition because I wouldn't be who I am without it. And that's a little bit about my eyes and where I am today because of it.
That's awesome, man. And honestly, I heard that that you gain perspective, and I think it's an incredible way to look at it. So obviously, like you mentioned, you could play that almost the victim where, of course we all have things that are, our pitfalls and things that we can't control, but it's switching that perspective. And what do you think that change, where did it stem from for you personally?
So when I went to graduate school for physical therapy, I was moving to Philadelphia. It was 2016, and I had just lost a pretty significant portion of my eyesight. So I was just not in a great mental space. The first year of school was really, really challenging for me, not necessarily from an academic perspective, but just from a life positivity perspective. I would wake up every morning, and no matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't put a smile on my face. And yeah, I put a smile on my face for everybody else, but inside I was hurting and there just wasn't anything I felt like I could do to change that. And so, long story short, started spending time with this girl who I had a huge crush on. She is now my wife, spoiler alert. But at the time where we first started spending time together, I realized pretty quickly that she was special and that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. And there was this one moment where she was going to California for a few months to do a clinical rotation for school. I was going to stay here on the East Coast. And so we said goodbye. She dropped me off at a bus stop and she drove away. And I felt homesick. It was the same feeling I had when my parents dropped me off at college for the first time. And I realized at that moment in time that I wanted her in my life forever. And I knew that she was special to me. I loved her and I wanted to be my best for her. And it was in that moment and then that subsequent season of life where I realized, I can't control this condition, right? I'm at the mercy of whatever happens with my eyes, but I can control how I respond and the perspective that I choose. And so from that moment on, I realized that I needed to change the way that I saw this condition, change the way that I saw myself, and change the way that I saw the world. So I chose not to be sorry for myself. I chose to embrace this. And I realized through that process that the only way to strength is through struggle. right? If you go to the gym and you lift weights and it's super easy and you're not challenging yourself, you're not going to grow. You're not going to adapt. You're not going to get stronger. And in life, there are two kinds of hard. There's the hard that we choose and the hard that chooses us. And I'm a firm believer that both kinds of hard are incredible opportunities to grow and to find strength. And so that's how I chose to see my eyes, because I wanted to be my best, not only for myself, but for my wife, for my family, for my friends, and for every other person in this world who I've yet to meet. And I just feel like I owe it to the world to be my best. And I do that through perspective.
That's awesome, man. It really is. It's so inspiring. And again, people would be like, "Oh, well, because obviously I see what you do physically. I know you have the run streak going. I think today was 136.
138 or 9, maybe. I'm losing count, honestly. It's tough to keep
Killing
track
it.
of.
But
Thanks, man.
obviously, people would say, that's a reason right there not to work out. But obviously, you take it and you go full force with it. So how do those two things kind of correlate?
Yeah, so I started my fitness journey when I was 13. I got into fitness like most people get into fitness. You want to have a girlfriend, right? You just want to look good and feel good. And so I would go to the local YMCA. I'd walk there after middle school. I had no idea what I was doing, but I quickly fell in love with that process of going, pushing myself, seeing results. And through the journey, fitness has really become less of a physical thing for me and more of a life thing for me. And it's just that beautiful analogy of, I don't always feel like going to the gym. I don't always feel like going for a run, but it's a commitment that I made to myself. And so I'm going to get up and I'm going to do it. There's this beautiful quote by Alexis Carrel who said, "Man cannot remake himself without suffering, for he is both the marble and the sculptor." And the reason why I love the physical aspect of fitness is because you are literally sculpting your body. You are sculpting your abilities and the way that you perform physically. But at the same time, you're sculpting yourself in a different way. You're showing up, you're doing hard things, you're being consistent, and that work over time changes the person that we become. So, fitness for me has really just been a vehicle to change my mindset, to improve as a person. And I don't know where I would be without fitness, to be honest, because outside of those things, it's just a place that I can go and I could forget about the problems of the world. I don't really need to be able to see all that well to pick up a dumbbell. And it's just a place that I can't imagine my life without.
Absolutely, man. I totally agree. And honestly, the more mature I'm getting, the more wisdom I'm gaining. I'm realizing, you see people that hit a certain pinnacle of success in certain areas, and I feel like the people that really piece it together, like you said, they choose their heart. They push themselves physically as well, and they kind of encompass everything that success entails in all areas of their life, not just, some people crush it financially or in certain areas, but when you kind of put yourself through that, I feel like you said, you create the person. It's cool.
Well, yeah, I agree with that. And I appreciate that. I don't think you could walk into a gym at 5 o'clock in the morning and find any person who's not successful in other areas of their life, right? Like if someone's
So
up
true.
at 5 o'clock in the morning, gym opens up, they're walking in the door, like odds are they're pretty good at all of the other things that they're doing, you know?
So true. Yeah, it's the accountability, it's showing up, like you said.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So what type of physical activity do you do personally, or what do you enjoy doing?
So I would say I probably have two categories of enjoyment when it comes to fitness. One, which is more recent, is running. That's something that you and I share in common. I see you running all the time too, and that's a Nick Bear thing. I grew up in my first love in fitness. My first enjoyment was just lifting weights for the sake of getting stronger and building muscle. I really found the process of pushing myself in the weight room with resistance training. I found that to just be euphoric, right? It felt so good to me. So that's my first love in fitness. But then you see this guy like Nick Bear, right? This huge dude with a ton of muscle, incredibly strong. And he starts this endurance journey and he starts to, slim out a little bit. But this guy who's running his first marathon over 4 hours is now running marathons under 250. And he's still big, he's still huge, he's still strong, and that balance of strength and endurance, which a lot of people refer to as a hybrid athlete, has become so appealing to me over the past couple of years. So I would say lifting weights is number one in my heart, and then running is a close number two.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm sure you're gonna dabble into that high rocks world eventually, right? Because that's the combination of both. I feel like everybody's headed that way. It's funny.
At some point, you and I both know Sam Tooley, and he's been encouraging me to check it out for a little while, and I've been slow to jump on that, mainly from just a time standpoint on my end. It's hard to throw something else onto the plate, but hey, if Sam can do it, I'm sure I can do it. So maybe I'll see you there sometime.
Yeah. Listen, it's something I definitely want to delve into eventually. And like you said, obviously busy guy, got a lot going on. So how do you structure a day? How do you kind of map all that out for yourself? Because I feel like time management is something that people really need help with.
Mm. I'm a huge calendar guy. I could not live my life without a calendar. If you look at my calendar, anybody's ever seen me post a screenshot of my calendar, there are colors all over the place. Everything's blocked out. I have time in there to run, to lift, for all my coaching calls, for business development, for time with my wife, even in the evening. And people might think that's a little crazy or overboard to schedule time with your wife in the calendar. But to be honest, I know myself so well that if that wasn't in there, my calendar would overflow and I would not get that time with my wife like I want to. So for me, it's all about intentionality. I believe that how we spend our time directly impacts and correlates with the person that we become. And so I see every single week, I believe 168 hours as an opportunity to craft, to chisel away at the person that I'm becoming. And so I sit down every Sunday and I map out my week. I have a lot of recurring meetings just with coaching calls with clients, my own podcasts, some writing blocks, things like that. But outside of that, things kind of piece together and fall into place, kind of like this podcast. And the crazy part is, when I first started this full time entrepreneurial journey a little over a year ago, I could schedule things same week, no problem. And now I'm at the point where my calendar gets so full 2, 3, 4 weeks out that it's really hard to fit things in. And so it's a blessing, but my schedule is everything to me.
It's crucial. It really is. It's so important to manage your time because again, it's finite. And yeah, so obviously you kind of dove into entrepreneurship head on. And like you said, it's only been a year and calendar's filling up. So that's awesome. So how has that transition kind of affected you?
Yeah, it's something I knew I wanted for longer than I thought. I graduated from a Doctor of Physical Therapy program in 2019 in the spring. I got my first job started 4 days after I graduated. It was actually a crazy 4 days. I graduated and gave the speech to my class. I proposed to my wife a few days later and then started my first job a few days later.
Good
And
week.
that was a good week, man. It was a great week. But I jumped right in. Like I didn't take any time off. I just wanted to work. And the pace of the clinic I was in, it was fast paced, seeing multiple patients an hour. And I liked it. But after about 6 months or a year, you start to get a little bit tired. And then COVID hit. And I realized when things slowed down because of COVID that I didn't enjoy the pace at which I was working because I couldn't be fully present with my patients. And I felt like because of that, I wasn't able to give my best to people. So the wheels started turning and I started thinking, well, how could I take ownership of my time? How could I create the impact I want? How can I take ownership of my life, really? And so I'm lucky enough to have people like Sam Tooley in my life, many other friends who are entrepreneurs themselves. And I started having these conversations, and the conversation would always end the same way. Entrepreneurship is the hardest thing that I've ever done. And it's also the best thing I've ever done. I wouldn't change it for the world. And I heard that enough times where it was almost like I was on this diving board and I was inching closer to the edge and I was looking over for a while. And then finally, I had one more of those conversations and I just jumped. And it's been amazing ever since. It is very challenging and it's very rewarding. It's taught me so much about myself. And I really feel like entrepreneurship is just personal development disguised as business, as crazy as that sounds.
I love that. That's so true. It really is. And I feel like the more you piece yourself together, the more other things do tend to click. And it's so funny that you said that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost hard to explain, but I feel like the more work I've done on myself in terms of just bolstering my mindset and perspective, becoming more aware, putting routines and systems into place so I could journal and meditate and work out. The more I take care of myself, the better business does. And it's hard to create this direct correlation, but I've seen it to be true too many times not to believe it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's funny because you will hear people say like, "Oh, you put too much time into working out or you put too much time into this or that," but they don't understand that you need that to be your best in the other areas.
Yeah, I think sometimes you need to be selectively selfish so that you can be sustainably selfless. You need to take care of yourself. I used to think that going to the gym for 2 hours a day was selfish until I tried to change that. And I realized that I was irritable. I wasn't pleased with myself. I wasn't at my best for the rest of the day if I didn't have those 2 hours of alone time, me with the weights. And I realized that makes me better outside of the gym.
Absolutely. I feel like everybody has that solitude. It comes in different forms, obviously, but just you have to find it. What type of coaching does that entail? So it sounds like kind of like life coaching and almost business coaching as well, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So I would say there are really three main buckets. It's fitness coaching, mindset coaching, and business coaching. And really, through all three, the goal is the same. It's just to identify where somebody is in this current moment, where they want to be at some point in the future. And then to understand that in that gap, there are doubts, there are fears, there are questions, confusion. You might feel stuck, frustrated, lost, you name it. And my job, as I see it, is to walk hand in hand with somebody through that gap, to offer my knowledge and expertise as needed, to give encouragement and support where it makes sense, and then to challenge people to take action and to hold people accountable to that action. Because at the end of the day, it's great to think about things. It's great to dream about things. It's great to reflect on things. But the truth is that nothing changes if nothing changes, and action creates clarity. And so with every step, you get just a little bit more clear on where you need to take the next step. And sometimes you take two steps in one direction and you realize that you should have been going in the other direction the whole time, but you need to get there to realize that you need to turn around. And so a lot of what I do is encouraging people, challenging people to take action, and working with them through that gap. And it's really like just an awesome friendship to me, where I get to be a good friend to somebody. And then on top of that, challenge them and hold them accountable.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. Like you said, it's you're able to make a deeper impact, and that's kind of what it comes down to. I made a career switch myself. I was in policing, and again, same. I just feel like I wasn't making the difference I wanted. I'm still piecing it together, but it's true. You kind of want that fulfillment once you start doing the self work. You want to help others.
And I would also put this out there, and this is kudos to you for just starting something, right? Like I started a podcast and that podcast ended. I started another podcast and that podcast is still going strong. And like through those two experiences, I've gotten to talk to hundreds of really, really cool human beings. And those conversations not only have influenced me and shaped me in positive ways, but then you get to share them with other people and you get to realize, left this conversation feeling energized. What was it about that conversation that left me feeling energized? How can I incorporate that a little bit more into my life? And by taking action, you get to create these connections. You get to put yourself out there. You get to learn about yourself and the world. And I would guarantee that if I didn't do this podcast that I'm doing, the Project Endure podcast, or the previous podcast, I wouldn't be where I am today, hands down.
Absolutely. Again, the more I'm growing and learning and piecing these things together, you need every part of the journey. It's crazy. Obviously, you mentioned that you're writing. So what does that entail? Is it I see you do a newsletter, which I think is awesome. I read Atomic Habits, and I know James Clear does a newsletter as well. And it's such a great concept.
Yeah. So I grew up really not enjoying reading and writing. It's kind of a crazy confession, but I had never read a chapter book until probably like a quarter of the way through college. I just hated it because, they make you read Lord of the Flies and Animal Farm. I'm sure those are great books, right? But I'm not a Shakespeare guy. I'm
Wouldn't
not a
know either.
fiction guy. So, like, if someone had handed me Atomic Habits, which didn't exist, but back in high school, yeah, I would have loved reading, but I didn't. So anyway, I really found writing probably that first year of graduate school, that really dark time in my life. And I started journaling. I just felt like I had no other place to turn outside of talking to my parents. And so I started writing. I started just gathering my thoughts on paper. And I realized that it helped me not only feel better and almost vent in a way, but to start to organize those thoughts. Because when things are just bouncing around between your ears, it could be really hard to make sense of stuff. So that's how it started. And then about halfway into that first year, I realized like, hey, I'm the kid who's sitting in the front of the classroom, getting straight A's, working out. I probably seem like I have it all together on the outside, but on the inside, I'm absolutely falling apart. And so if I feel this way, odds are somebody else has to be feeling this way. So I wrote about that and I published my first ever blog. And the reaction was so cool. Like everybody was so supportive, so encouraging. And then the coolest part was that people I knew and people that I didn't even know would reach out and say, Joe, thank you for writing that blog. That really helped me. I'm in a dark place as well. And this is what's going on. And I just realized, like, hey, I got to keep going with this writing stuff. And as I wrote more and more blogs, I realized that not only was I getting a lot out of it, but other people seemed to be enjoying it as well. I started the newsletter 107 weeks ago. And I know that because I keep track at the beginning of each newsletter. So I send that out every Sunday, almost as a mental reset for the people reading. There's a quote in there, there's a thought in there are a few questions and resources in there. And I've enjoyed that. I co-authored a chapter in a book that came out over this past year called Forever Athlete, talking about my football experience and some life lessons I learned there. And then ultimately, I would love to write a solo book. And I'm toying with the idea of the title, Bringing Out the Best, How Losing Sight Has Given Me Vision. Best being a play on Best disease, which I'm pretty proud of. My wife's probably rolling her eyes if she's listening to this.
That's good.
Um, but yeah, so I love writing, and I think it's really powerful to be able to shape a story because at the end of the day, we are all the stories that we tell ourselves.
Absolutely, man. I think that's awesome and inspiring. And so I was the kid in the back of the class, not getting the straight A's. But it's funny because I was in the same boat when it came to reading. And
Mm,
I think what I've learned as well is, and you just hit it on the head, is the vulnerability is something that it lets you connect with people on a different level. Because a lot of people, like you said, they want to, you see the person sitting in the front of the class, lifting the weights, getting A's, and you just assume they have it all together. And a lot of people want to keep that facade going. But when you let them in, it's just a different, you connect with people and you learn people on a different level and you learn yourself.
yeah, oh, I couldn't agree more. And to just drive that point home, when I went to college, I walked onto the football team at Bucknell University, and there's this kid on the team. His name was Danny. He was a great athlete, great human, just very likable, had a lot of friends. So I stopped drinking after my first semester, freshman year of college, which is kind of funny because I drank all throughout high school and I've actually never had a legal drink. But anyway, I stopped and I felt really lonely because everybody else was out partying on Friday, Saturday night. And I would go to the library by myself. I would go to the gym by myself. I would sit in my room by myself. And I just assumed that everybody else, including this kid, Danny, was out partying, having the time of their life. And I guess 8 years later, or almost 10 years later, my wife and I got married and we went to Maui on our honeymoon. And at the time, Danny was living in Maui because he moved there because he could. And he's a YouTuber, which I think is the coolest thing in the world. But we met up on a beach and I brought up something about college football. And he just said, yeah, man, I hated it there. And I was like, what do you mean? And he was like, every Friday and Saturday night, I just sit in my room and cry. He's like, I didn't drink. I felt so alone. I was so sad. And I was like, no way, me too. And it was in that moment that I realized if I had just not tried to keep my facade up, if I just told somebody what was going on and maybe I tried to reach out to Danny about it, we would have been really, really good friends a whole lot sooner. And maybe our college experience would be a whole lot different. And I think too often we are sitting next to people, talking with people, living with people, even who are going through something really, really hard. And we might be going through something really, really hard too. And we just keep the facade up. And neither of us know that the other person's also hurting, also struggling. And we just end up feeling really, really alone. And so if you can be vulnerable with somebody that you're close to, that you can trust, I say do it. Because at the end of the day, being vulnerable and being authentic is probably the most powerful thing any of us could do.
Absolutely, man. And I think obviously you're writing, me starting the podcast, I think that's what it's all about. And I've kind of realized that. And it also goes back to something everybody always asks, how are you? And it's always the, oh, good, how are you? And no one to really sit down and ask that question and mean it is just a giant difference.
Mm. And it's hard too. And I'll acknowledge this that, in the society we live in today, things are really fast paced, especially up in the Northeast, where you and I are. It's just, people necessarily don't have the time. And that's one thing. But also just to know that we all have the gift of technology, right? At any given moment, you can send a text message to a friend to set up a phone call. Heck, you can even just call a friend. You don't even have to text. And you can set aside that time intentionally to be with another person and to genuinely ask how they're doing, to be there to listen. and to really just, you know, help somebody through just being present and being vulnerable yourself, I think is one of the most underrated things in our society today. We don't do enough of it.
Totally agree. And then another thing, obviously, that you're doing as well that you mentioned is, or that I saw, is the public speaking. So
Mm.
kind of goes hand in hand with the writing, and then again, being authentic, being vulnerable. So if you want to just touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, the world of public speaking is hard to crack into. It's a
Sure.
challenge. One of my most prized possessions is a sticky note I have with all the rejections that I've gotten, mostly from TED and TEDx applications. And I'll get there someday. But
Absolutely.
you know, for now, it's mostly, you know, high schools, middle schools, local small businesses, things like that. I just love being in front of people. I love sharing my story. I've been really touched by multiple speakers throughout my life, whether they were in person or even just watching a YouTube video online, or, hey, even listening to a podcast. And we grow up hearing that phrase, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And I think that couldn't be further from the truth. Words can really hurt. Words can do a lot of damage. And also, words can really make a big positive difference. They can lift people up. And at the end of the day, it has to be vulnerable. It has to be authentic. And I just love being in that space. So someday you'll see me on a TEDx stage, but we're trying.
I listen. I have not a doubt. I believe in you, man.
Thanks, man.
Of course. And so I just want to get into a couple questions. So what would you say is your biggest fear? This is something I've just been asking, not even guests on the podcast, just I asked my mom this the other day. It's just something that when you really sit down, like, what is something that really scares you?
So I'm going to try to make this answer make sense. But when I walk down the street and I see, let's say, an 85-year-old couple holding hands walking down the sidewalk, my heart hurts. Like I get so sad for no reason other than the fact that I look at those people and I realize that they're running out of time relative to me. And now, hey, life can be over at any second for any of us, but generally speaking, right, they don't have as much time as potentially I have. And that makes me sad. And I think that makes me sad because my biggest fear is getting to the end of life, knowing that, like, hey, I've got a couple breaths left here, and realizing that what I thought was important for my entire life actually wasn't important. It looks like me working crazy long hours and missing out on time with my wife and my children. It looks like me pursuing money over relationships. It can look like so many different things, but I think my biggest fear is that I only truly make that realization in a meaningful way when I don't have that much time left. So I guess regret would be my biggest fear.
I think you're too aware to allow that to happen. So I wouldn't stress it, but it's obviously something to keep in front of your mind.
Thanks,
And
man.
and another one is just what's something you want to be known for? So obviously you're very passionate, you're very inspiring, but if you could give one message, what would it be?
Well, I think I'm gonna try to cheat here and get two messages in. Maya Angelou has this great quote where she says, "People won't remember what you said, they won't remember what you did, but they will always remember how you made them feel." And, you know, whether it is being a small business owner, being a performance coach, being a writer, being a speaker, or just being a friend to somebody, I just want to make people feel loved and capable. I want people to feel encouraged. I want people to feel confident. I want to leave every interaction knowing that hopefully I made somebody just a little bit better than when I left them. I would just love for that to be a ripple effect and for other people to feel just a little bit better so that they can go make somebody else feel just a little bit better. So I think the legacy I would love to leave is love. And if I can use my actions and my story and my condition to share any message or to spread any message, it's just that, you know, sometimes when we're in a dark place, it can feel like we're buried, but we're actually planted. And we have to choose to believe that. And that's a quote I paraphrased from Christine Kane, which is the quote behind my one tattoo. So I totally cheated that question. I gave you way more.
So the more the better. I love that answer, man. It's great.
Thank you.
And lastly, so the name of the podcast is Keep Going. So what keeps you going? What's your why?
I just know that everybody's going through something. And when I don't feel like going to the gym, when I don't feel like holding the door for somebody, when I don't feel like being the best friend or the best husband because I'm tired or it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. What keeps me going is just that my actions have an impact on other people. And what I might perceive as not a big deal might actually change somebody else's life. And I've had those interactions affect me in such a positive and significant way that I feel like I owe it to the rest of the world to just show up, to keep going, to put one foot in front of the other, and hopefully inspire at least one person along the way.
Yeah, that I mean, it's awesome, man. It really and you really are. And I
Thank you, man.
couldn't say I really do really appreciate your time and the insight just from this conversation alone is it's got me fired up. And I'm excited for the rest of the day and the rest of the relationship that we could build here. And I really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Vin. No, I appreciate your time and I appreciate this conversation and everything that you're doing. So keep up the great work, man.
Of course, man. Thank you.